Persephone Foundation Field Report, File 7, Chinese Civil War. For this field report, we are deviating slightly from our standard procedure, as the situation in China is so fluid that the information coming out is, at best, unconfirmed, at worst, rumor and hearsay. So we will instead be operating on what information we do have. So consider this both a primer on the Chinese Civil War and the Atomic Kingdom of China. Now, as in our own timeline, the Chinese Civil War started in 1927, but continues to the present day rather than tapering off in the 1950s. There are three major blocks still active in China. Those are the People's Liberation Army, formerly led by Mao Zedong, the Kuomintang, which was led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the Atomic Kingdom, which is led by both an Atomic Emperor and a Viceroy. We have no names associated with these titles yet, and there are no public images of any leadership post-Atomic War. Now here are the major points of the conflict. Now, the war proceeded as in our own timeline until the Paraechoes World War II. There was still a long march, there were still dozens of warlords vying for control, and the war instead seemed to develop as a proxy war between capitalist Europe and America and communists in the Soviet Union. Now, the lack of any Japanese invasion of China allowed instead for a bloodier and more drawn-out conflict between the communists and the nationalists. Now, by 1950, Chinese forces were essentially locked into a stalemate. The KMT decided to focus on holding large swaths of eastern coastline as well as Manchuria, while the PLA was focused on controlling massive parcels of land to the west. Now, by 1955, conflict had become increasingly bloody. Desperate measures were continually utilized, including, but certainly not limited to, mass conscription, trench warfare, and an almost flagrant disregard for the rules of war. It seems that in the Chinese Civil War and Paraechoes, war crimes were just a matter of when to carry them out, not a desperate measure to be taken when all else had failed. Now, in 1959, the world had increasingly seemed to have tuned out the Chinese Civil War. No one wanted to be drawn into such a violent struggle. North Korea and Russia seemed to be the only willing nations that would even take part at all within the Chinese Civil War. The majority of allied nations kept the KMT at best at arm's length in terms of dealing in arms and humanitarian aid. In 1963, we found that there are rumors of cloning. Now, we can't verify this with the initial intel we have from ASIN. We will need to dig deeper, and hopefully we can have an agent in place within the Atomic Kingdom before we have to worry about any kind of major struggles erupting along the Chinese border with Russia. Now, from 1965 to 1966, there is the landing of a meteor in the Himalayan mountains, and the near simultaneous development of atomic weapons between the PLA and KMT. As near as we can tell, both sides literally just went back and forth stealing from each other on their developments and technologies. By 1968, however, the atomic war had occurred. China was essentially destroyed, though it didn't stop World War III. But it seems that by that point, no one wanted to go near China. Not even the Empire of the Rising Sun wanted to get themselves involved within the Chinese Civil War by that point. Shortly after this, however, several bands of survivors were brought together under the leadership of the Viceroy, it seems, and the Atomic Kingdom of China was declared across the mainland. Now, this is inaccurate, however. The Atomic Kingdom claims all of China's landmass. However, the PLA and KMT survive. The PLA, however, is scattered across a large amount of land in western China, and the KMT has shattered into feuding petty warlords along the eastern seaboard. As several cities and enclaves are also not under the direct control of any faction, but they do appear to bow to whichever leader can provide them protection at any time. In terms of intelligence on these factions, the Atomic Kingdom is very sparse at best. ASIN, from what we have found, has little to no actionable intel. However, it should be noted that the kingdom is only 1 year old and is totally isolationist. No one from outside will ever be allowed entry, even for diplomatic talks. The only intelligence we have is secondhand, out of date, or, from what I can tell, probably purposefully vague. The leadership positions of the Atomic Emperor and Viceroy also have very little on them. As mentioned, there are no pictures, there are only the titles. But as near as we can tell, it seems that the Viceroy is the actual leader who holds political power within the Atomic Kingdom. The Atomic Emperor is probably at best a ceremonial title, so we can presume that the Atomic Kingdom is more of a constitutional monarchy than any kind of monarchical state. Now, we have noted several ground-based facilities utilizing massive amounts of atomic energy, but we also have seen, as noted, the massive space fleet hovering in geosynchronous orbit above Chinese territory. We've also seen massive armies, according to intelligence reports, marching across the Chinese landscape. But something we have noted, some of their soldiers look like typical human beings, and I mention this because the vast majority of atomic Chinese forces seem to have pointed ears. We believe this may be some kind of caste system set up to ensure that leaders are always recognized instantly by the fact that their ears are not pointed. This is our theory, however. We do not know at the present time whether these serve an actual function in determining rank, or if this is some kind of sick attempt to create a new culture by controlling how the people of the Atomic Kingdom look. Now, at present, the Atomic Kingdom assaults the borders of Burma, Siberia, and Mongolia. However, they are not at war. No war has ever officially been declared by any force. The Soviets and the Allies are simply trying to hold their territory against the Atomic Kingdom. They're not actually fighting war. In fact, several sources have pointed out that Allied attempts at diplomacy are still ongoing, and the Soviets have at least tried twice to make diplomatic envoys to the Atomic Kingdom before essentially giving up. Now, for the KMT, there are several dozen surviving warlords to the east coast and on Taiwan. Chiang Kai-shek is dead, and it appears from the intelligence we have on this timeline that nothing of great value was lost when he was killed. The KMT seem to have modeled themselves after a quasi-feudal society, where warlords owe fealty to the strongest above them and lend their forces when he orders them to. Now, there are several current frontrunners who can be said to lead the KMT, and these are their actual titles. We feel that they are psychological titles meant to unnerve the enemy, given how they are named. The first is Chen Cheng, who is known as the Undying. He has the most stable army out of any warlord in the KMT. Now, Undying may refer to the fact that he is very hard to kill, a title born out of assassins constantly failing to end the life of a man they have been sent to murder. There's also Du Yuming, the Mad Machinist of Manchuria. He seems to hold the largest forces of the KMT. We can presume he's an armored warfare specialist. He Yingqin, the Godhead of Formosa, holds Taiwan, as well as several surviving KMT ships. Godhead is a very odd title for the man, but we can imagine that he's immensely powerful on the island of Taiwan due to the fractured nature of the KMT. Godhead is either a derogatory title adopted out of spite for his enemies, or as a term of endearment by the local population who are protected by his forces. Now, there are several rumors of other survivors circulating. Most numerous focus on Bai Chongzi, known as the Cancerous Scourge. This is probably a sobriquet applied after he possibly split from the KMT late in the war. Now, the KMT forces are in communication with the Allied nations, and small-scale humanitarian and civil assistance programs are being imported to the mainland. But there are multiple redacted records from the period during World War III. They are receiving heavy assistance from the Indian reservists. This is a possible show of strength by India, along with their frontier corps, to show the Russians that the Allied nations do have teeth. More specifically, that India is capable of going on their own. They are just choosing to stay with the Allied nations. Also, several notes here state that the Allied nations are very uneasy with the fact that the war is still going on. By this point, all major conflicts within the world should have stopped, at least as believed by many of the Allied nations' member states. Vietnam, of course, is a low-level guerrilla conflict, even with the Tet Offensive. The fact that the Chinese Civil War is still going on as a full-scale military conflict has many trying to figure out what exactly is going on and how can this ever be stopped. Now, as for the PLA, there are multiple surviving warlords on the North Korean and North Vietnamese borders, with unknown numbers to the west. Mao Zedong was announced dead by the Atomic Kingdom, with multiple PLA forces essentially becoming bandits and outlaws in the ruined wastes. The Allies and Soviets have had no luck making a firm count of leadership, and there are many major names noted as missing and presumed dead. There is Ta Hun Kwai, Guan Yu's chosen one, an armored warfare specialist. He was last seen flying east in a personal helicopter. He is presumed dead. There is Xing Shitao, I believe. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any of these names. The holder of the Forbidden Flame, an artillery and later nuclear weapons expert, who is also presumed dead. Xin Fai, the Puppet Master, a specialist in infantry warfare, who is, of course, presumed dead. The only confirmed dead name we have on here is Liang Liang, the Himalayan huntress, she had the strongest force in the wasteland and was even forming her own faction, the Liang Hegemony, but she was later killed by an atomic bomb blast in her base in the Himalayan mountains. Now, the current definite leader that we can find, and we use that term loosely, is known as the Doctor. There are dozens of rumors on the man, and we have no time to sift through them during this report, but we will try and make some attempt to explain them in a later report on the PLA itself. Now, the Soviets are in contact with multiple PLA surviving forces. Note that the Allies also mention hundreds of redacted Soviet files as well. It seems that there are some things happening in China that neither the Allies or Soviets can actually deal with, even in their intelligence circles. However, the Soviets are sending entire divisions to assist on the Chinese border, which may explain our earlier confusion on the numbers in terms of the Soviet forces being sent to the Chinese border. But there is no sign of a direct Allied-Soviet conflict, so we believe that yet again this is a proxy war being fought between communist and capitalist. The Allies also observe that the Soviets are very silent on several PLA actions, such as the mass conscription of surviving villages. Make of that what you will. Now, as for strengths of these forces, the Atomic Kingdom, to start off with, is almost an expert on the knowledge of atomic fission in this timeline. Remember, as we've mentioned before, the Allied nations utilize fusion power, and no faction has a firm understanding of atomic fission. Only the Atomic Kingdom seem to be the experts on what makes atomic fission work. They also seem to have a very complex and advanced manufacturing capacity. They seem to be able to nearly instantaneously manufacture materials. However, we feel that they just have a mass system of assembly lines capable of pumping out hundreds of vehicles and armaments a day. They also have their massive space fleet. The cloning technology is very interesting to us. We need to find more intelligence on that. I believe that this could be a key factor in bringing the Foundation a more secure means of sending teams to other timelines. And finally, they are the only force able to utilize atomic weaponry on a wide scale. They are, like the Allied nations, a force that utilizes directed energy weaponry, and they use it to full effect. They have it mounted on their vehicles. They even have personal atomic weaponry on the side arms of their officers and even their forces. Essentially, they have ray guns, and they will use them. Now, the KMT utilize massive defensive works, practically unbreakable. Several files make mention of something known as the Endless Trenches, which we can presume are a massive KMT earthworks capable of repelling even the fiercest PLA assaults. They also have relatively stable alliances, considering that they are a feudal power structure. It would make sense that each warlord does owe fealty to the strongest above them. The only real blocks are Chen versus Yin King. Both have tried to kill each other under the guise of, according to the Allies, military police trying to wrangle a insubordinate officer. So we can presume that that is the best excuse they can give to the Allies for why they keep trying to kill each other. Finally, they control massive amounts of the Chinese coastline. Only regions near North Korea and Vietnam are still under PLA control. Moving on to the PLA, their strengths are the large number of armed forces still roaming the countryside in western China. They are fluid and adaptable forces, and they still possess a large number of armored vehicles even after the atomic bombs. In terms of weaknesses, the Atomic Kingdom seem to have very little, but Allied intelligence is very scattered. We will need time to dig. The KMT are very inflexible in their strategic dogma. They have a desperate manpower shortage, which we are trying to find information on how they're keeping up with it. And the Chen versus Yin King conflict is sapping vital resources from fighting the PLA and Atomic Kingdom. As for the PLA, the surviving forces are too scattered to make any major strategic planning really effective. The leadership has essentially been gutted, and several groups of PLA fighters will seriously fight anyone, including their former communist comrades. Finally, we have several notes made on the situation. Several ASIN reports mention the transformation of the land. We are trying to find out if this is a symbolic transformation in terms of the damage of the atomic bombs, or if this is an actual literal transformation, some kind of massive works project designed to turn the ruined land into something more effective by the Atomic Kingdom, as they are the only force with the resources capable of doing so. Now, there are no mentions of unaffiliated survivals in any official intelligence reports. This is a possible oversight. The KMT and PLA forces are desperate for funding and resources. It's our possible in as far as ruined China is concerned, but the Allies and Soviets are keeping the PLA and KMT at arm's length for now. If we do not move on this, we could lose a vital method of gaining more intelligence on what happened in China. We do not know why the Atomic Kingdom are invading Burma. North Korea is invariably involved in the conflict by sending elite commando units to assist the PLA where they can, but for sure, the Atomic Kingdom has the highest level of technology in China. They have the methods to clone, to actually build functioning space elevators, and they can use atomic fission in a ray gun. While we should emphasize extreme caution in trying to get closer to the Atomic Kingdom, we believe that the Atomic Kingdom has several pieces of high technology we should pursue with all due haste. We are planning a massive conference between agents in the field in the Paraechoes timeline. This will be forwarded to you at a later date. Field team signing out.